Chapter 8, Part 3. So in this section, we're going to be looking at expertise and metacognition within the realms of attention and memory and learning. Okay, so in the first two parts, we looked at what memory is, what are the important processes involved in memory, in terms of like change, storage, encoding, retrieval, the different parts of memory. So now we're going to look forward, right? So what we're going to look at in this next section is what difference, what role does our current memory play in the learning of new information? Okay, I was trying to put this in different words and I stumbled. So somebody who has a lot of information about something and somebody who has zero information about something, how do they learn differently? Okay, so that's the difference between expertise and novice. And that's the part we're going to look at in this first section. So this is an overview of the different pieces that we're going to be looking at when we talk about expertise in learning. So let's look at it in terms of like an example. If you have someone who's, say, an expert at math and patterns and geometry, just that whole area, and then somebody of similar age that's just more of a novice, it's just not their thing. Okay. The people who are experts will learn faster and easier given the same information than the novices will. And we're going to look at why that is. Okay, these are the different pieces, and then we're going to go into them in a little bit more detail. So experts are better at novices at detecting features and meaningful patterns of information. If they're both looking at different patterns or like a math problem with different aspects to it, the experts are going to see all of the pieces, whereas the novices aren't. Accumulating more content knowledge and organizing it in a manner that shows an understanding of the topic. They're better able to organize the information in their heads because they can see the big picture. Retrieving important aspects of knowledge with little effort. So we talked a bit of that with automaticity when it comes to reading. Remember? And we'll get more into that. And then lastly, using effective learning strategies. People who are experts, they just have effective learning strategies and they use them and they're able to process the information very quickly. So first, detecting features and meaningful patterns of organization. So experts have an attentional advantage. They're better at noticing important features of problems. Because they already have a background in math or with these shapes or with these puzzles, they already have schemas for these things. They already have information and an organization or hierarchy on which to build this other information, right? So they have an attentional advantage. They're able to, instead of spending their time trying to notice and figure things out, they're able to easily do that and start noticing other pieces. Okay. Whereas a novice person is probably going to be looking at, what they perceive as 100 pieces of random information. And first they have to make sense of it, right? They give an example. There was the teacher, a novice teacher and an expert teacher, and they had 3 screens showing different events in a videotaped classroom. And the expert teacher was able to look at the 3 screens, say, okay, well, this student's doing this, this is happening, this is happening, this is happening, because they're able to see everything, right? And process it so much easier. Whereas the novice teacher, it's just an overwhelming amount of new information. The second piece, look, it says AA. Organization, and I'm going to fix that. That bothers me when it sits like that. Well, I'll fix it later. Organization and depth of knowledge. Experts' knowledge is organized around important ideas or concepts. Experts establish more elaborate networks of information. So we talked a little bit about how our brains create these mental maps and categories. And under bird, you have canary, you have fish, ostrich is a little further away. So we have all of these elaborate networks of information already created, right? Once we have experience with that. So expert knowledge is organized around important ideas or concepts. So when the expert in math is looking at this problem in our example, they already have concepts and ideas and an organization for how things go together, whereas the novice doesn't. They're having to create those. So that's another advantage. Fluent retrieval. Experts retrieve information in an effortless, automatic manner. Effortless retrieval places fewer demands on conscious attention. So we gave the example when you're reading, right? When you're first learning to read, you have to attend to first the letters and the sounds, and then you have to attend to the syllables. I almost said syllabus. Syllables. And then soon it becomes automatic and it becomes effortless, right? So you're reading, and instead of having to focus on the syllables and sounding out the word, it becomes automatic. So now your attention can be focused on the meaning of the sentence, right? Whereas a novice is still struggling to try to make the sounds out. They can't get to the meaning of the sentence and the larger concepts yet. Okay, so experts have fluent retrieval. In this section, we also talk about cognitive load theory. Okay, and what that has to do with is teachers paying attention to the types of cognitive load that is the student is having to struggle with while completing a task or learning some new material. Okay, so cognitive load theory suggests there are 3 types of cognitive load that you have to think about as a teacher. First is intrinsic load, which is intrinsic load of the concept or the task that you're teaching, like the actual topic, right? Germane load, which is related to the working memory resources needed to learn the material. So what are you teaching them? What type of short-term memory or working memory resources do they need? And then there's extrinsic load, related to the load imposed by the instructional procedures, plus extraneous loads like noise in the classroom. So what that means is that when you're designing an activity or designing a lesson, there's what you're learning, which, say, in this slide, we're talking about expert versus novices, fluent retrieval, adaptive. The extrinsic load is going to be if I had created an activity for you to do around these things, and perhaps the activity, the instructions were not very clear. Okay, so now you're having to spend some of your cognitive mental energy trying to figure out what are the instructions, what are we supposed to be doing. Maybe the activity isn't directly related. It could have been related better to what you're trying to learn, right? So these are mental effort, cognitive effort that the students have to exert while they're trying to learn. And then, of course, extraneous load, that would be if there's a buzzing in the background, like say of this video, or when Teddy barks, or if you're in the classroom and there's other things that are going on, people chatting, that's the extraneous load. So there's different strategies in here for taking those things into consideration. And I'll look at that. It's on page 279. So look at Cognitive Load Theory by Sweller, 2012. Part D, experts have adaptive expertise. So because they have the experience, because they have the concepts formed and the structures, and they're able to think quickly about different things and process the information faster, therefore, they tend to be more flexible in approaching new situations, right? They're able to bend their knowledge and think of things in new ways, and just generally be more open to rethinking ideas and practices and doing things differently, instead of like a novice may tend to be a little bit more rigid because they're still trying to figure it out. Lastly, using effective learning strategies. Used by experts to understand information in their area of expertise. So we talked about different effective learning strategies earlier in the chapter, right? We talked about like deep learning versus shallow learning. We talked about elaboration, about creating meaning and giving examples, different strategies that can help with studying, right? In this section also they talk about acclimation, the initial stage of expertise. So when a student is first learning something, well, when you're in the novice stage, really, you have to create all these categories, right? You have to create the network of connections between ideas. You need to have a base of knowledge about the topic so that you can start seeing patterns, so that you can organize it in your head. And once it's organized and you have this base, then students can start to differentiate like the correct information from incorrect information, or relevant from irrelevant, and really focus on the main concepts. So Alexander's 2003 view says that students don't come to the classroom equipped with the strategies they need to move beyond the acclimation stage. So students are going to show up in your classroom, like think maybe of the first time you took a course. What would be one for me? Say I took animal learning and behavior, right? The first time I took it, I'd never seen anything like that, other than, the classical and the operant condition that we talked about. But other than that, if you know nothing or very little, right, then you're in this acclimation initial stage of expertise. Or, I don't know, the first time I took a Latin course, I don't know anything about Latin. So everything just looks like a big mess of information and random knowledge, right? So students start out in this initial stage, and there's strategies that teachers can use, you have to use to help students move out of this stage and towards being experts in that area. So they discuss a few of them here. So let's start out with the first one, spreading out and consolidating learning, right? So teaching students the difference between learning consistently over a 3-month period or a 2-week period, whatever the period is, versus cramming at the last minute. Okay, so teaching students how to do that. How do they distribute their learning evenly so that they're able to take their time and encode things properly and in a deep, like engage in deep learning rather than shallow learning, which tends to be what happens when people cram. Teach them how to ask themselves questions. So when you're reading these things, when we're talking about expertise in learning, we're not just going to read over the chapter. Why are we talking about this? We're talking about this because there's a big difference between people who, the learning speed of an expert versus the learning speed of a novice. And why is that? Because of the things that we've talked about. It's important to know, why are they learning what they're doing? Why is this important? What is an example? That's why I use examples all the time, right? Give an example of something so that you can understand it at a deeper level. Also, you can encode it better and possibly remember it during a test, right? Self-questioning strategies have been shown to improve reading comprehension in students many times. So the next section, taking good notes. People do not just inherently know how to take good notes necessarily. Some people just, especially young kids, they just scribble notes down. They're not really sure what they're doing. They need to be taught how to make good notes. Okay, either from a lecture or a text. So talk about different note-taking strategies. So when you're teach them that we're going to talk about something for 10 minutes, and at the end you could summarize what we just said in your own words. You could outline, sort of like I do here, the outlining with the main categories and the subcategories. And in my notes in university, I would have notes under it doesn't look like this. I would have sub, right? And have a mental picture, mental organization, right? And concept maps help children practice drawing concept maps. There's different things you can teach them, because sometimes if you don't, they're just going to sit there and write down everything the teacher says. You cannot do that, because first of all, there's no way they're going to be able to keep up. They're going to miss out on all the important points. So they need to be taught how to do that. And that's the skill that you can teach them by starting with like a 10-minute talk, and teach them what point form looks like. Teach them what summarizing information looks like. And then after, you can talk about, did you write down the important points? Did you get them? Did you miss any important points? And then talk about those things. So I teach ESL for students coming to Western or King's academic prep for international students. And that's one of the things that we have a whole section on is teaching students how to take good notes in lectures, how to identify important information and information that's not so relevant, and how to create good notes. Okay, lastly, using a study system, which is similar to what we've been talking about. And specifically, they're talking about PQ4R, right? So teaching them how to study in a meaningful way. So teaching them to these steps, which is preview, look over what you're going to do first to get a general idea of what's going on. Question themselves about the material as they read it. What does this mean? Why is this important? And then we've got the 4 R's, which is read, reflect, occasionally stopping and looking over the material, like, why am I learning this? Recite, this involves children self-testing themselves to see if they can remember, and then review. So there's the steps that are outlined a little more clearly in the book. It's much about what we've been talking about so far, but it's about teaching students that there are effective ways to learn and effective ways to study and systems that you can employ, as opposed to just reading the text without a strategy, or listening to the lecture without a strategy, and then getting to the test and just hoping you remember it, right? And then wondering why I read the text. Why did I only get 65 when somebody else got, 88 or 90? What did they do differently? Oops. All right, moving on to the next section, acquiring expertise. What determines whether someone becomes an expert? Now, here we're talking about, like, the example that we had before is an expert in math versus a novice in math. And in that example, it was like an expert, like somebody who's just really good at it. This particular section's talking about expertise, okay? Somebody who is over the top, an expert at something. Whether that's like Mozart and music, or somebody in sports, or like Justin Bieber in music, or Ariana in music, that type of expertise, okay? So 2 things that they take into consideration here, well, 3, is practice and motivation and talent. So the idea is that in order to be an expertise, to acquire that level of excellence, involves deliberate practice made at an appropriate level of difficulty. Okay, so practicing something over and over and over at a somewhat difficult level while receiving corrective feedback so that you can do it again and get more feedback. Okay, that is required to become an expert. Because of this, how difficult that is, becoming an expert in something, it requires considerable motivation, right? You'll see people who say go through high school and they join in sports, whether that's swimming or basketball or volleyball. It doesn't even have to be swimming, like playing a musical instrument, anything. And by the time they hit high school, other things become more important, social life, whatnot. Then you're hitting 15, 16, 17, and you're having to practice 5 days a week. It's hard, right? Sorry, I was interrupted there. Oh, where was I? Yeah. So they hit 15, 16, 17. They're having to practice 5 days a week. And it's really, really hard, right? So a lot of people give up. And then, by the time, whatever, the amount of people becoming experts in either of, any of those things, it's more of a 1 in 1,000 kind of deal, right? And then lastly, the idea of talent. In order to become an expert in a lot of things, there's the heritable aspect, of just coming by that naturally, right? Lots of different abilities, whether it's just being really, really good at math or being really good at music or art. I can't draw worth anything, and I don't understand people. When I see people who can, I just don't get it, right? So there's a heredity component, right, to expertise. Expertise and teaching. This is the final section on here. This is about, have you ever had a coach or a teacher who was really good? I had this one teacher, and he was my first year math in university. And brilliant teacher. Sorry, brilliant in math. And he'd stand at the front of the board, and he just started talking and writing stuff all over the board, and I had no idea what he's talking about. I mean, he's obviously brilliant in math, but just because you're brilliant in a particular area does not make you a good teacher. Okay, so there's a big difference between being an expert in something and being able to teach it. Sometimes being an expert in something can make you a less effective teacher, right? Because you forget all those little steps at the beginning, all those steps that are now so easy for you. People still do have to learn that the first time around. And here's where we come across the difference between content knowledge and pedagogical content knowledge, which is teacher effectiveness. So content knowledge is just knowing about that area, right? Pedagogical content knowledge is teaching effectiveness. It's the ability to know how to break it down and how to teach it. So pedagogical content knowledge, expert teachers are aware of common difficulties students have as they try to learn a content area. Expert teachers are good at monitoring students' learning and assessing students' progress. So, for example, learning objectives. We've talked about this many, many times. Pedagogical knowledge, content knowledge, I know how to write learning objectives. Many years of doing that. Pedagogical content knowledge is knowing how to teach you how to do it. So, I've noticed over the years that students really struggle with the many different aspects that we talk about. So they struggle putting the action verb at the beginning, right? They struggle wording it in such a way that you can measure it. They struggle with going up Bloom's taxonomy. Struggle with the clarity of language, and then also sometimes it's too vague or it's too specific. So that's why we go through so many examples, is going over it, and then we do some on the board and we take it up as a group and breaking it down. Okay? So I think that's a pretty decent example of the difference between content knowledge, which would just be showing you how to, here are 10 learning objectives. This is how you do it. We're done. Versus knowing where students tend to have difficulties and practicing and addressing each of those concerns and breaking it down into those different aspects. The final section is metacognition, or knowing about knowing. So as we've talked about in previous chapters, metacognition is knowing about knowing. Right? It's about intentionally reflecting on what you know or how you how you did on a test or why you did on a test. It's reflecting and using strategies. How do I say this? I'm not saying this very well. Sorry. It's about knowing about knowing. It's about examining your own mental thoughts. It's about examining your everything, your own cognitions, and then having the skills to change them to be more effective. I guess that's better. So metacognitive knowledge, there's two different types. Metacognitive knowledge is monitoring and reflecting on one's current or recent thoughts. So sitting here now and reflecting on one's thoughts that exist in your head right now, or experiences or things that happened in the past. That's metacognitive knowledge, right? Versus metacognitive activity. So metacognitive activity it's a skill. It's your ability to change or adapt your strategies either in advance or in the moment in order to solve problems better. It's about purposeful thinking. So looking at a study, I thought we'll try to go through this study together. So it's examining a group of students, two groups of students. One group of students used metacognitive skills, like a metacognitive training course, right? Skills called MSK. And then the other group did not receive the training. And they're both going to go through a certain activity and then measure the results at the end, right? So it was a study, 8th grade students trained in MSK about teaching them how to have like higher order thinking strategies going into a task. So they go in, there's a 12-lesson biology unit on reproduction. So both groups of students went through the same course, but the one group had the instruction. They learned about skills, like the why, the how, the when, what types of tasks require the use of this strategy. So they learned all about this strategy and how to use it during this 12-lesson biology unit. So at the very end, they then measured performance and knowledge of the material during the course between the two groups. And what they found is that the students who received the MSK training of strategic and metacognitive strategic thinking skills, their thinking improved dramatically following the instruction, and this improvement was found again even 3 months later, so they were able to retain the information over a long period of time. So that's one example how a research study that demonstrates that intentionally engaging in metacognitive activity and planning and problem solving can drastically improve performance for students. So the ability to teach your students these skills, it's something that they need to learn how to do, right? And like I said, there's lots of different types that you can learn and types that are outlined in this text, but it does make a significant difference. Developmental changes. So how does metacognition change in childhood, and how does it change like across adolescence? Improvement of metacognitive skills results from developmental changes as students mature cognitively in metamemory and theory of mind. So metamemory basically is learning about your own memory and learning about how your memory works. Right? Theory of mind, that develops like from a very young age, from the age of 2 to 3, ages 2 to 3 years old. Children's theory of mind changes as they go through childhood, as they go through adolescence. Theory of mind is your awareness of your own mental processes and the mental processes of others, to understand that other people have a mind and other people have a perspective, and trying to understand other people's thoughts and feelings in relation to yours. Anyways, so as this develops, as the theory of mind develops, and it goes through here, page 286 and 287, it talks about age 2 and 3. So children begin to understand like mental states, like perceptions and emotions and desires, goes through here. Age 4 to 5, children come to understand that the mind can represent objects and events accurately or inaccurately. Talks a bit about that. Then middle to late childhood, things change again, or develop further again, I should say. Middle late childhood, that's when things start to like sort of change in terms of they have a deepening appreciation of the mind itself, not just mental states. Okay, they start to see a bigger picture. And then in adolescence, they're able to monitor and manage cognitive resources to effectively meet so they're able to take a little bit more charge of it, right? It's almost fully developed, and they can monitor, they can make changes, they can strategically employ different cognitive resources in order to solve a problem. So those are the developmental changes. The good information processing model. This is a model a little older, Presley et al. So this is a information processing model that Presley outlined, which basically says that competent cognition and metacognition results from a number of interacting factors. It's a fairly simple model. Basically, it's saying like from the very beginning, children are taught by parents or teachers to use particular strategies. Okay, so they're learning particular strategies for learning specific knowledge. And then the more intellectually stimulating children's homes are and schools, a greater number of specific strategies they're going to learn to use. So they've got these specific strategies first, and then next comes learning then they start to see the differences and the similarities between different types of strategies. Right? So then they're able to start relating them and comparing the different strategies. And then finally, the third is that students recognize the benefits of using strategies, which produces general strategy knowledge, right? So they understand the benefits of strategies. They understand how they work. They're able to come up with their own. They're able to evaluate and select and change strategies in order to be more efficient in problem solving. All right, and finally, strategies and metacognitive regulation. So how do you help students learn metacognitive strategies, right? And metacognitive regulation. So first, as always, model effective strategies for students, right? And model it in your own work. Reflective learning, planning, just have it always as a model in the classroom. Give students opportunities to practice strategies, right? So you can have, start with very basic strategies with possibly a simple activity that they're doing, and then have them practice setting goals and having things go out, have them practice reading and reflecting and asking questions, all of the in-between steps, right? You're starting from the bottom, from the very, very basic, and then working up and having longer and longer activities. Encourage students to monitor the effectiveness of new strategies when compared to old strategies. Again, key in metacognition is to be intentionally reflecting on what went well and what did not go well. So if there's a new strategy that they're trying out, how does it compare to the old strategy? Are there parts that are better, parts that are worse, and how could you possibly integrate the two? Be patient and give students support for new strategy learning and use, of course. Encourage students to use multiple strategies. Once they've kind of got good at, using one or two strategies, then you can sort of build on that. Read about strategy instruction. Question students to guide strategy thinking. Okay, so you can ask students about why did you plan to do it this way? What are your goals in here? What are the benefits of doing it this way? What could possibly be an issue that might come up? And then support low achieving students and students with disabilities. They may need more time to become effective in independent strategy use. So you're going to have to differentiate the learning, right? Because some students are going to be very good at strategies and learn them easily, and some students are going to need more help. So you're definitely going to have to differentiate the lessons in doing this. These are the slides I leave for our in-class reflection. And we are at the end. Okay, so in this video we talked about expertise and learning, acquiring expertise in teaching, and then next we talked about metacognition with developmental changes. How does metacognition, how does that change from birth through being a toddler in elementary school and then adolescence, the good information processing model. A bit of a simple model, but it's good to know. And then strategies in metacognitive regulation. Okay, 35 minutes, a little bit longer there. Anyways, that is it, and I will see you in the next video.